The sheer vastness of the Pacific Ocean is staggering, covering nearly one-half of the Earth's surface, with only a smattering of small islands rising above. Yet determined people would build the crafts that would sail this enormous sea and establish interconnected communities amongst the scattered landfalls. When Europeans first sighted black people thousands of miles away from Africa, they named the region Melanesia, a Greek-rooted word meaning black islands and separating the black inhabitants from other Pacific islanders. Today, the term Melanesia is embraced throughout the region, and discarding colorism or racism for defining Pacific regions, such as Melanesia, Polynesia, and Micronesia, the Pacific Islanders have formed much stronger cultural bonds that leave these artificial boundaries in their wake.
As you can see, there's we've got the canoe, the Fijian double-hull canoe. Mm-hmm. This is just a smaller size, but in reality they have built massive canoes which could hold 200 to 300 people at a point in time. When traveling. So given the canoe in itself, it could carry them in long distances. Even there's evidences of inter-island traveling mm-hmm. from within the Pacific region. Mm-hmm. Their mode of transport it was quite advanced during that time. Mm-hmm. If from an outsider, if they came and see how the canoe sailed, they'll be fascinated mm-hmm. of how skillful our forefathers were.
Skillful indeed. No compass, sextant, or maps. Known as the wayfinders, they navigated thousands of miles of ocean using their senses, sighting stars which weren't always visible, the winds, flight of the birds, tasting the water for river freshness, smell of the sea, driftwood, seaweed, and one you might not want to try, testicle navigation, either sitting on the floor of the canoe and feeling vibrations, or tying a coconut hair to a small stone with the other end tied around the scrotum and slipping into the sea at the bow of the canoe, feeling the swells, waves, currents for directions. And with all those skills, they hit the island destination of 1,000 miles right on point. The canoes and the oars were strongly constructed with tropical hardwoods like teak, ebony, and sandalwood. This one is one of the last and donated to this museum. That's an oar, one. The sail is up 1/10 the size of the original. Amazing because yes. It looks so large.
It is. It's large, but imagine back in the days, the vessels were really huge, and it was used for trade purposes, for during war times. They had ramming canoes, which could ram into other canoes. And yes, everything was done on the canoe, cooking. They could carry livestock on canoes. They had to go from island to island to replenish their supplies. So they managed to go through thousands and thousands of miles of travel through those means.
Traditionally, in Fiji, the Fijians would wear their hair afro. They would use the traditional Fijian comb. The women still maintain that hairstyle to date, and some Fijian men are using it. With the stories that our ancestors came from Africa, and hence the reason why most Fijian women had the afro hair.
Itoke. Yes.
And they were explaining that they have an oral history that goes all the way back to Tanganyika
in
East Africa.
East Africa, yes.
Is that right?
That's the oral tradition. Yes, that story has been passed down from generation to generation. Lutula Somba, one of our forefathers, and Dengue, who came right from Africa. As you can see, we have frizzy hair.
From the ancestral past to the present, Fiji hair, what we call nappy, and the Dura canoe are symbols so embedded in Fijian culture that between 1924 and 1970, they graced the coat of arms and waved on the national flag. When Europeans first observed Africans on Pacific islands thousands of miles away from Africa, the initial response was, "Must be survivors of wrecked slave ships." Wrong. Thousands of years before slave ships existed, archaeological and biological, that would be DNA evidence, confirms that earlier waves of humans out of Africa reached New Guinea over 50,000 years ago. And by sailing catamarans, they reached the Melanesian islands 3,500 years ago. And as Melanesians will inform you, that's 2,300 years before Europeans learned to sail the open seas. 1,100 years before Jesus Christ, thousands of years before ancient Greece and Rome, and many thousands of years before France and England even existed. Nineteenth-century colonialists and missionaries conflated the history of cannibalism in Melanesia by labeling native customs, including tattooing, as debased and primitive, while promoting the narrative that Melanesia was a paradise wasted on savages. However, the same colonialists are silent on the ongoing kidnapping and enslaving of millions of Africans, while supporting the extermination of Aboriginal peoples in both America and Australia. So, who are the savages? The term was blackbirding. Starting in 1863, tens of thousands of Melanesians were tricked, kidnapped, and/or physically forced onto ships, transported thousands of miles to sugar, cocoa, or cotton plantations in Queensland, Australia, and sold to the owners. This supposedly labor contract was slavery by another name, and the British would end this savage practice in 1906. Takune mahi, Black people with naturally occurring blonde hair and light eyes? When Europeans first came across this phenomenon, they insisted that it was the result of diet deficiency or contact with shipwrecked European sailors. Not shipwrecks. The genes and coded hereditary instructions were present during the African chrysalis of humans, and of course present when the Melanesians trekked out of Africa over 5,000 years ago. That coding includes tall, dark, fat, skinny, light, dark, and black complexion with light eyes and blonde hair. The other two Melanesian countries are Papua New Guinea and New Caledonia. Caledonia is still French territory. They fly the indigenous Kanak people's flag and the tricolors.
Now we're going to Africa. Ikululega, Ikululega, Uche ho wanko uzobugobela.
The African diaspora, the ones whose ancestors were kidnapped some 400 years ago and survived months at sea chained to the putrid bottom of a slave ship? No, these Africans left the continent 5,000 years ago on a journey that would eventually cover 10,000 miles and would take 1,500 years of walking, oaring, and sailing, of love and pain, strife and challenge before reaching islands of the South Pacific and building a new home nowadays referred to as Melanesia. And yet after millenniums, Melanesians still remember African home they left behind. Melanesians, a proud, warm, gracious, and elegant people. I'm just glad to be related. This is griot historian Jamal Okeo Jamal.